Recently, I have had the pleasure of learning about Benjamin Banneker, someone who I have named a clockworker turned or clockmaker turned astronomer. Now, Benjamin Banneker was pretty special for his time. He was born on November 9th, 1731, to Robert and Mary Banneker. Eventually, that name's going to change to Banneker. Now, his mother, Mary, was the product of an English mother. They said she had lily white skin. Her name was Molly, and a father who was a former prince turned slave. There's been some argument that he could have been the son of like a chieftain, but he claimed he was a prince. And Molly had purchased him and another slave some years back and eventually freed both of them. And after freeing one of the slaves, Molly, the English woman, does marry him. Then they have children. Now, this was very, very different for the time, considering that Molly was an English woman and white, and their marriage was not really allowed at the time, given that it's early 1700s when this is happening, and very frowned upon. But they kind of lived out in the boonies of Maryland, and so they didn't see a lot of people. They had quite a few children, but they were very much regarded as not necessarily mixed, but as people of color because their skin was so dark coming from their father. Um, One of those children of Molly is Mary, and Mary eventually is going to marry Robert. Now, Robert is also a former slave, now freed. He is from Africa as well, and Robert is saved after, or freed after he turns Christian. His former master then frees him. Um, Both of his parents are going to live at Molly's house. Molly loses her husband pretty early on, and they wanted to save to buy their own farm. Benjamin is going to be the first child of this marriage, and pre- um, he is the first of five, with four sisters following him. Those sisters eventually are going to be really helpful to Benjamin as they really take care of him in his later life. Um, Benjamin's going to be raised on stories from his grandmother and England, and then also stories from his father about what was happening in Africa and his enslavement. His father is going to die pretty early on. Um, and that will leave him in charge of the family. So at 6 years old, his parents do end up buying land. They get 100 acres, which at the time is going to be a huge amount. They've saved all this money for that. And Robert and Benjamin are both on the deed of this. For this family of color, this is going to be a huge accomplishment and really shows how much work this family is putting in to doing whatever they can to be successful. The farm's going to be primarily used to grow to tobacco, but also will have an orchard and will hold like a house garden to survive off of. Benjamin will learn how to grow the tobacco, how to change fields, um, how to clear land for new fields, and how to also re-enrich the soil through his time with his father, learning about the land. And Benjamin will live his entire rest of his life on this land. Um, he is going to start some of his calculations at this early age. A lot of his education is going to be self-taught. Molly, his grandmother, is going to teach him how to read and write, but most of it will be self-taught. He gets to go to Quaker school for a little bit of time, but is really needed at home to help with the farm and the fields and working at harvest time, so he doesn't get to spend a lot of time. However, he does meet George Ellicott, who is going to be a huge influence in his life throughout the time, mainly because of George's connections and how those are going to help Benjamin later on. At the age of 22, Benjamin Banneker is going to create his first scientific achievement, which is a clock. After only seeing two timepieces in an entire life, he creates a clock, and people will come to look at this clock because it was quite precise for its time. Um, he uses the visualization from the former timepieces that he's seen, and he creates this clock that will stay with him for the rest of his life and is known in the area that he lives. Like I said, his father dies when he's pretty young at the age of 28. And he has to pause what he's doing to really take care of the farm and his family. He has his four younger sisters, he has his mother to take care of. He's really making sure that everybody is set up for success. He focuses on that tobacco farming, and he learns how to play the flute and the violin. And we're at about 1759 at this time, 1759 when he's 28. He's not going to be overly affected by the American Revolution that's coming up in 1776 because he's a free person of color. He does not have to fight for America's independence, and he is going to really spend his time at home taking care of his family. Along with his friend George, Benjamin is really going to foster this love for astronomy. He is going to learn everything he can about astronomy. He's going to borrow George Ellicott's books, going to borrow some of his instruments, and just really, really learn anything and everything he can. He is just wants that all the knowledge he can get. And he is going to write ephemeris, which is the basis for an almanac. In 1990, he sends this off to printers and wishes that he could be printed for the first time. And Major Ellicott, Andrew Ellicott, is going to be George's cousin, is one of the people who this ephemeris is sent to see if the calculations are correct. Now, either due to some correspondence or just due to not really wanting to rock the boat because he's a person of color, this ephemeris is not published. This almanac is not published. And because of that, he's going to take a little bit of that heart. He's going to be pretty sad and just he wants this to be successful, but he wants to also make sure that it's his work and that it's because of what he knows. We see how much he hopes and dreams in his letters and in his journal to become published. And we recognize that, or he recognizes that being a person of color, this would be huge for him to have this accomplishment. While he did not get published, he is going to be able to learn and foster that connection with Major Ellicott, and he is actually going to be asked to join in on what he deems is the greatest adventure of his life, which is surveying the county for the District of Columbia. So at the beginning of 1791, Major Ellicott is tasked with starting a survey of the area to create the nation's capital. And George Ellicott is asked to help in this endeavor, but he's busy. The brothers of Major Ellicott are also asked, they're busy. So George refers Benjamin to be able to help in this endeavor. And at this time, Benjamin is 60 years old, and he goes out to the field for the first time and learns from Major Ellicott how to survey and does a lot of the calculations required around the survey. Um, Spends a lot of time in the tent with the all of the different tools that are used for the trade to do the calculations about the placement of the stars and the moon and the sun and the movement of these to really make sure that the survey is done with authenticity and correctly. Having the access to these astronomical instruments and to Major Ellicott's mind really helps Benjamin to secure his work for the following year and the next ephemeris that he creates. The newspapers at the time comment on the work being done and the fact that Mr. Banneker is there as a person of color. Um, and specifically, it proves that Mr. Jefferson, meaning Thomas Jefferson, was wrong in saying that people of color are not capable. Um, and by April 1791, Mr. Banneker returns home, completes his next work towards an almanac, and starts sending this to printers in the late summer of 1791. Again, with help from George Ellicott, he's going to send this almanac to Philadelphia, to Baltimore, to Georgetown, and work with a bunch of different printers to get this published. And his Almanac 1792 was published. He even reaches out to Thomas Jefferson for some help in this endeavor, and Jefferson writes some very nice letters saying that he is a capable person and refers him to the Marquis de Condorcet to also look into this publication. Uh, Mr. Banneker proceeds to write 6 different almanacs from 1792 to 1797. Throughout this, he is suffering some health problems and he is trying to keep up with his calculations. After 1797, he still was making ephemerides for almanacs, but these are not going to be printed. It could just be because the times had changed and what was required in the almanacs was not what he's giving anymore. It also could have been because of his failing health. His handwriting was not where it needed to be anymore. Just at 1797, that was the last time he wrote one. He is going to stick to the work that he is doing in his calculations, but in his later years, he's really going to sell off his land to the Ellicotts. He's going to focus on being a solitary individual. He never marries, never has children, and he is going to just stick to the math that he's been doing. These mathematical calculations to determine when an eclipse might be based on the positioning of the sun, moon, stars at any possible point, and based on some nautical almanacs that he is going to acquire is really going to take some time. There's multiple calculations that he has to do. Mind you, he's doing all of these by hand. There's some logarithmic equations he has to do. And it really does take time, especially because a lot of the work has to be done at night for him to be able to do it correctly, because he needs to take those calculations of the movements. He starts off doing this with many different methods, but he finally focuses on one method and uses those other methods just as a check for his later calculations. Uh, at the end of his life, like I said, he's still doing these calculations. He's sold off most of his farm. After he sold off his farm, though, the Alcott family is allowing him to live out his life on his property. He has some interaction with his neighbors, but it's pretty solitary life. Um, on October 9th, 1806, he's going to meet up with one of his neighbors, and he is going to say that he's not feeling well, head on home. The neighbor's going to follow him home, and then he is going to die in his home that day. It's a Sunday. After this, he is buried 2 days later, and most of his books and his manuscripts that were not taken out at the time of his death are going to go up in flames. His entire house is engulfed in flames while he's being buried. So, some of those later works and some of his calculations and such are going to be lost because of that. Finally, an obituary is going to be published in the Federal Gazette on October 28th, 1806, recognizing his work in the surveying of the national capital, but also recognizing all of his calculations and the work he did for the almanacs, and then also recognizing that he was a person of color and that he did all of this while being a person of color, while having that setback based on the time and the fact that people of color were not given um, the same leniency as to someone who might be white. So he was recognized as being a prominent mathematician of his time, regardless of the color of his skin. Again, most of this being self taught. It was very fun learning all about Benjamin Banneker, and I hope you guys get to take something from this as well.